10 years. And when I met Tobias, he was a House member, and I was interested in a piece of legislation that he was sponsoring. Um, I found him to be very open and a good listener. He has always been given a great deal of credit by his peers in the House and in politics generally. He's a good fundraiser, um, which has some merit for the position he's running for. And he's a family man, has 2 children, a lovely wife. He's an ex-executive with the Nike Corporation. And so he has a lot of very good experience. He is now the state treasurer and has done an excellent job in that regard. And so I recommend him to you for governor. He's not only honest and has the right values, and I'll let him speak to those tonight, but he deserves our support, and he certainly has mine. So Tobias, take the stage.
Thank you, Charles. I really appreciate that really kind introduction. It means a lot given our history and the fact that you have quite a good selection from which to make that judgment. So I appreciate it. I'm also grateful to each of you for being patient as I was a little bit tardy. I think I have a good excuse. We were hustling back from our son's first third grade basketball practice. They were all wearing masks, and it was fun to watch third graders figuring out how to remember to dribble when they start running with the ball, for example. So it's a good dose of reality amidst all these other campaign things. So if we haven't talked a ton about what the agenda is, but I figure I talk for maybe 5 minutes about things that I'm working on and thinking about in the context of the campaign, and then I'm really interested in hearing what's on your mind and having a dialogue if that sounds okay to you. Some nods here, so I'm gonna plunge ahead, and feel free to interrupt or redirect me if I'm off track. I'm running for governor because I feel like we need some steady leadership in some of these crazy times. We've got to get past a situation where we're kind of lurching from crisis to crisis. I think that's how we build a better future and lay out the vision for where we want to take Oregon, not just for the next year or even the next 5 years. For me, it's really about the next generation. I think we're planting seeds now, and we've got to make sure that we're doing that in the right way. And it's really simple for me. The way I want to measure our state and the progress we're making is by how well our kids are doing. There are too many kids these days who are going to sleep hungry, who are dropping out of school, or who are feeling like there aren't any opportunities left for them in the rural communities that raise them. So we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we're making Oregon a place of opportunity for everybody. And I'm frustrated because none of that's going to be possible. We can't really make progress on that until we get control of the virus. And the good news is we have the power to do it. The challenging part is there are some people who have some strange definition of freedom in which they put their own version of that ahead of the health and well-being of the rest of us. And tomorrow is actually a big day for our family in that regard. Our third grader is going to get his second vaccine tomorrow at long last, and that will be the rest of that will mean our whole family is finally fully vaccinated. That's a big deal. But right now, the truth is that there are a small minority of unvaccinated Oregonians who are putting at risk the health and well-being of our kids and our economic recovery. And that is why I am strongly in favor of vaccine mandates across the state, whether they're put in place by school districts or local governments or businesses. It is the way out of the pandemic. It's how we stop the spread, including the Omicron variant, and how we get back on track. And it is also why, when they are fully approved for the full age range, I think we've got to add the COVID vaccine to the list of 8 other vaccines that are already required for K-12 students in Oregon. This is just the route forward for us, and it's going to require all of us to come together. But that's what we do in Oregon is big things, and it's what I've always tried to do with our future in mind as treasurer, working to grow the economy and protect your retirement. It's why we've helped more than 100,000 Oregonians save for their retirement. First in the country program called Oregon Saves, with more than $130 million saved by 100,000+ people with retirement accounts they didn't have before. So we saved $500 million in Wall Street fees. And why in the legislature, I was proud to be part of the group that led the effort to bring full day kindergarten to Oregon and create a rainy day fund that's helping us navigate economic disruptions like the one we're navigating right now. So I've always kept my focus on this future, but as I look across the state, I see a whole lot of work that we have yet to do, and I'm tired of tinkering around the edges of longstanding problems. We've got to make sure that pre-K is available to every kid, to make sure that they get a good, strong start in their educational opportunities. We've got to look at smart ways to extend the school year so we're not losing that momentum, and obviously better support our teachers in the tremendous work that they're having to do. Got to make apprenticeships and vocational training available to everyone who wants it so people can get the good jobs they want and build the decent life they want. And we have to be on offense, investing in clean energy so we can battle against climate change and protect this great place that we live in. But I think beyond these specific policies, we've also got to change the way that government operates and be willing to try new things. If that longer school year is going to produce better outcomes for students, we should figure out how to do it. If letting people take the college classes they want wherever they're available, whether it's a community college or a four-year institution, if that produces more graduates and less student debt, we should figure out how to do that. These are just examples, I think, and we've got to take that innovative approach across state government, whether it's related to our unemployment benefits administration or foster care. We've got to figure out how to fit government into the complicated and crowded lives that Oregonians lead. And I never want to be that guy who says that's the way we've always done it as a barrier to a good new idea. I want to stay focused on how we improve the lives of Oregon kids, their health, their education, their economic prospects. That's how we can build the Oregon that we want for ourselves and for our kids. The last observation is that almost anything I've ever done or seen done that's worthwhile requires teammates. And this is certainly going to be true of a campaign that we've undertaken here. So I'm looking forward to the conversation we have tonight. I hope you will consider being part of our team and help us do some great things for Oregon. So thanks for letting me be with you tonight. Again, thanks for tolerating my tardy arrival. I am eager to hear what's on your minds, please.
Hey, questions for Tobias?
Just not all at once, please. There's someone with their hand up. Who are they?
Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I am wondering what you have in mind for addressing homelessness in the state and the housing crisis.
Well, the first thing, thanks for asking, Sarah. I think what I've really been struck by so far is that when people talk about homelessness, it is almost a disservice, and I don't aim this at you, to call it one issue, because it really is the culmination of a whole lot of issues that are coming together, from the supply of housing to the variety of circumstances that people have dealt with that put them in that situation. One estimate has 14,000 people across the state. You think about the various ways that they got there, whether it's someone who's lost a job, or a relationship ended, or an LGBTQ youth who's been kicked out of their home, or a spouse trying to escape domestic violence. All these things are part of it. Those numbers are dramatic. They're across the state. And one other one that sticks with me is the fact that 4% of K-12 students across Oregon are homeless. This is essentially 1 in 25, or 1 in every classroom. It's not acceptable. And I also really object to the notion that some people seem to have about it being an either or sort of situation. There are some people who say we can't take anything on until we've dealt with the long-term solutions. We do have to deal with long-term solutions, which would include being honest about what our land use system means and what requirements are associated with housing. So we got to deal with that in the long run. But that doesn't mean we can't do things in the short term to make sure that we're using our dollars to make sure that there's short-term shelters in place, that there's wraparound services happening right away. What we have to be cognizant of in all of this is that what we're doing right now is not working, and it's not working fast enough. I had a really interesting visit a few weeks ago to downtown Portland. We walked around with a number of business owners. 4 of the 5 that we talked to were women, and every one of those 4 reported being assaulted and accosted in the course of their regular business by folks who are camping on the street. I have a lot of empathy for situations that people are in, but this isn't safe for anyone. And we have to be a lot more aggressive about using the dollars that we have more effectively, more quickly, and taking the all of the above approach to deal with the short-term and the long-term solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason?
I think Mike had his hand up.
I did, but Jason, fire away.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And thank you, Tobias, for being here today. I'm going to indulge myself in a little bit of a specific question.
Sure.
And so hopefully Mike doesn't mind. So I'll just preface this by saying I'm a city councilor and for the city of Silverton. And I'm a big advocate for affordable housing and dealing with homelessness. But this is the toughest struggle that I have as a city councilor is I want us to accommodate and do what we need to for our folks that need affordable housing. But I have some big obstacles. When a apartment complex or unit comes in with hundreds of apartments, the infrastructure cost for the developer and or us is going to be huge. And I don't have a way to raise the money to help pay for that. I don't have an answer to that. And I'm here with my fellow progressives and I'm admitting this, but the truth of the matter is there's some big costs there and I don't have a way. The state restricts me from being able to raise more money to pay for that. So what we end up with is high-end, expensive luxury apartments. And then when it comes to development, this is kind of part 2 of the question. When it comes to development, there are things that we can do that are smart, where we place these developments in locations that are cost effective, that make sense, that are coastal city services. But we're in a land use environment where we lose any case if we deny an application for a development because of the housing needs in the area. And then when it comes to positive development that could help with affordable housing, we don't have the means to help make it happen. And so I'm looking for a specific answer that the state has expressed that we have a housing emergency. And they have kind of put this mandate on those of us in small towns and in big cities that we have to figure out a way to accommodate it. And I just don't have the tools. So I'm curious about what are you going to do to give us the tools to actually accommodate this?
I think we have to make sure that we are your partners. If the state is denying you those tools, and I assume you are referring to the property tax limitations in Measure 5 and Measure 50. That's a an interesting discussion that's probably not going anywhere in the near future because the requirement that it would be a constitutional change. But I think the legislature, the governor, ought to be a lot more intentional about using the resources that we have between our bonding capacity, between our cash allocations. And right now, given the federal support that's out there, let's be serious and intentional about that. It does require a statewide approach because each city and community has probably different versions of this, but I don't know anyone who isn't experiencing some of these same challenges. And it's a conversation that I would love to have with you in more specifics to learn more about what those barriers are and what are the particular circumstances that you find as opportunities. I think there are opportunities that could turn that sort of development into real wins, and the state needs to be an active participant in supporting those.
I could give you a ton of examples,
Great.
but I also want to respect my fellow local conservatives and not monopolize your time. But I could.
Let's follow up. Let's follow
Okay.
up. I'll leave my. I think Jessica's on too. She'll put something in the chat so we can follow up offline. I'd be glad to do that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Mike was next then. Mike and then Gary.
Jason asked almost precisely the questions I was going to ask, but there are state overrides that keep our town and city zoning and planning departments pretty much hands tied. And given that we have this housing emergency, it seems to me that, well, let me say this. I am unwilling to accept what you said, that we will never have a constitutional amendment. That's not what we're talking about.
Mike, respectfully, I didn't say never. I said probably not happening real soon. But yeah,
I'm not willing to accept that. I'm getting a little tired of the Democratic Party just not going out with guns blazing, going after the top things. And I really feel like in this housing emergency that we have right now, that we have tied the hands of our city councils and our planning departments, and a governor that is willing to not say that we ought to make these changes, but actually commit to finding out what those changes need to be and to articulating them and to gather the resources of progressives. And you know what? A lot of conservatives know that we need more housing for low-income people. They're not really afraid of it. They just want to have input on it. And because the state ties our planning departments, they really don't have income on it. So I probably sound pretty frustrated to you, but I am tired of my candidates and my Democratic leaders not going full balls out on these things. And I just want to make sure I don't forget this one thing. You said that a small percentage of people have a mistaken freedom for something else. Right now in Oregon, a third of our population is not fully vaccinated. And in Marion County, it is a little over half and a little less than half that are not fully vaccinated. This is not a little tiny group of people whose freedoms are being mistaken. This is our lack of either requiring or articulating in a way that wins them over. If we are going to stop COVID, we have to stop, one, dismissing them, and two, we have to figure out how the hell to change this. Otherwise, this is not going to be a pandemic. It will just be an endemic. So done. I'm going to mute myself now.
no problem. You don't need to mute yourself for my sake, Mike. You do sound frustrated, and I understand why. There's a lot going on here. So where to start? I want to respond to some of what you said. With respect to the vaccines, it's a number that's moving, of course, and that's why I was really clear and why I've said from the very start, I think we have to mandate vaccines. I take people seriously. I don't begrudge them when they have questions, but they need to ask a qualified medical professional, not Facebook or Fox News, before they take their vaccine. That is what I meant about saying my concerns trump my obligation to my fellow society members. And that frustrates me. And I've been really out front on that from the start. The reason, and I hear you also about property taxes and limitations. The way I said it was intentional because I don't want to be that person who promises you something that can happen overnight. I was in the legislature. I spent nearly my entire time on the revenue committee. And I can tell you, we came up with the most whiz-bang smart proposals to change Measure 5 and Measure 50 in the Constitution. And it would get the amazing support level of 14% or something. So I'm never going to be the person who says, let's give up. But I also don't want to be the person who's going to say it's easy and we're going to do it tomorrow. We got work to do. And we got to be honest about what the trade-offs are. If we're going to, I had a conversation with some of the most ardent environmentally motivated folks. And I agree with a lot of them, but there are trade-offs between these things. If we put restrictions on things, that means we can't build things there, and there are trade-offs. All I'm saying is being honest about that. And when we want to do that, we have to be willing to make the investments that are required. So you should not feel like you have to apologize or mute yourself, Mike. Although I am confused to talk with someone whose last name is Ashland in Silverton. I'll get over that confusion. I think you make a lot of good points. It's all good. So I think you're making good points, and I think we're pretty well aligned as well.
I would love to, if it would be possible, for the communication between you and Jason. I know that we have land uses that we have put through that have been has gone through the process that Jason was talking about. These weren't about property tax. This was about the authority that the cities and the planning departments have over the use of individual parcels. Now, I know that that's but that's not a property tax issue. So our hands are tied, and we need help from the inside of the State Department and from the state government. And I'd love to, Jason, you're going to hit these in specifics, and I really want to see what comes out of that, because I think that is a massive issue. And so it's a big dividing issue.
It will be very helpful for me to know more about the specifics. So absolutely appreciate that.
Gary, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. You mentioned student loan debt and what can be done about it at the state level. As of January 1st, community colleges of 2020, community colleges in Oregon can start issuing four-year degrees and start four-year degree programs. None of them have. The reason for that is that the state higher education board has not set out the plans for them to set up a process to apply to have four-year degrees. So it's already been voted on and passed to have the option to do this, which if students can get their four-year degrees from a community college, the cost is about 20% of going through a state or private university, which a lot of times can actually be covered by Pell Grants and other things, especially on the lower income scale. So they can really get a four-year degree with almost leaving with no debt. But there were limitations put in place onto what those degrees can be, basically really technical fields. We have a teacher shortage. So there are changes that can be made to this program. One, to actually get the state to fix the problem where community colleges can actually apply for it, which should have been done a long time ago, but hasn't. And two, would you be willing to support removing these limitations so that community colleges can actually put forth four-year programs that will save students money into career fields that are actually needed right now, like teaching?
Gary, I want to make kind of an even more radical suggestion. I think we should be looking at this. This is sort of unrealistic, but to make the point, I don't really understand the difference between the reason to have a distinction between four-year institutions and community college
Sports
institutions. We should be talking about what kind of content do we need to deliver and where's the most effective and efficient way to do it. If it happens to be at a community college, great. If it happens to be at a four-year institution, great. I'm not convinced that there needs to be a difference in a lot of ways. I might be convinced of some specific circumstances or that sort of thing. But if you're a student and you say, I need this credit to do this thing that I want to do, your next question should be, where's the most convenient and effective and least expensive place to do that? And we should set up the systems that allow students and communities to serve those needs. I think you're asking perfectly reasonable questions, but I think we could talk about how we can go further and make it even easier.
I like it. I'm running for Fred Rod's Senate seat in the state, so I would love to, once I win that, work with you on that.
Yeah, that's great.
Lee?
Yes, thanks for joining us tonight. It's great. Last week, Bruce Goldberg spoke to the Senate Interim Health Committee and reported back on the Universal Healthcare Task Force that Senator Manning put together, which has been working for over a year with very smart people like Chuck Sheketoff and others on designing a single payer healthcare system in Oregon. We all know that's kind of the quixotic vision that a lot of states and most countries have figured out, but a lot of states have been trying to work on for a number of years. But there's a lot of in that plan. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but they're getting to the point they're going to come back to the legislature this time with the tentative plan, and then they're going to go back out through the summer and fall to talking to businesses and health organizations and the communities and special interest groups around the state to get more input. But my question to you is, we know that this is a quixotic and difficult journey, but where do you see the opportunity to move us to the kind of universal healthcare in Oregon that a lot of states are working on and most of the industrialized countries have been able to achieve?
I think one thing that is really clear from that conversation and from others, and I'll say something about this more in a minute, is that it's just antiquated and ineffective to suggest that the things we need to live in modern society have to be tied to employment status. There's nothing magic about that. People, or maybe not even employment status, but to employers. People move. People are not working in a traditional setting all the time. Increasing numbers of people are in gig economies and multiple situations and all that sort of stuff. So this concept of portable benefits is going to be central to healthcare and to other things. We've talked about Oregon Saves already as an example of this, and we've been able to dismiss or sort of pull aside that connection, and we've now got 20,000 people who have retirement accounts that the state has helped to facilitate. And I think there are lessons to be learned from that, as well as the work that that the task force is doing. So I'm fully open to that, and interested to hear how they continue to proceed. This is a small enough group now. We can, Lori, we can now call on people one by one and see. Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? Gee,
We
Charles.
lost Chip. We bored Chip.
Bedtime, huh?
Yeah, I guess so.
It's dark for so long now.
Yeah, it's easy to understand why there is reason to celebrate on the solstice. It's going to start getting better again.
Well, I really appreciate you joining us this evening.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. And if no other questions?
I have a question for Tobias.
That's Charles.
Tobias, I'd like to know your current views on creating a green bank in Oregon.
They haven't changed much. This is for the benefit of the rest of the group. This is something that Charles and I talk about from time to time. I think that the concept is solid. The questions are really ones of implementation and financing, where, I listen, as a treasurer, I wish there were some untapped and unlimited funds. I haven't found them. So we have to have some money to start it, and we have to have some good conversations about how best to devote those dollars. But I think it could absolutely happen. And I'll tell you, I've been listening to a really interesting book. I say listening because I haven't been reading it, and I don't want to take credit for that. A book that I'd recommend to many of you called, the title is Electrify. It's a book written by a guy named Saul Griffith, who takes a really data-driven, practical approach to the question of climate change. And it goes through sort of what are the various options, and points out how important it is to have the financing associated with all of these methods of transition. Obviously, as the title suggests, he's a big fan of electrifying everything as a way of dealing with the challenge of climate change and how to decarbonize our economy. And I think the state really has a role to play there. The other thing that comes to mind is this Italian economist I really like, a woman named Mariana Mazzucato. She has a brilliant retort to the complaint that I think we all get at various points from folks who object to government playing a role in these things. You typically hear someone say, the government's role is to level the playing field. Mazzucato says, no, no, no. Government's role is to tip the playing field in the direction of desired outcomes. And I think this is a place where a green bank could play a big role. So I hope our campaign is successful, and I hope we'll be able to make that part of our agenda.
I'd like you to be thinking about some of the public resources that are now in private banks being shifted to a newly created green bank.
Mm,
That's a good way of putting it. I'll definitely do that.
mm.
Jason, you have your hand up?
So yes, so I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question, but once again, it's also as a city councilor, but not just as a city councilor. It's about somebody who comes from an engineering family and have experience around the state, some within the department that I'm going to mention. But I guess I would be curious about what your thoughts are about a state agency such as ODOT, who has a long tendency to have kind of their set goals and objectives. And do you think that the legislature and you as governor would be able to say, getting cars around is important, but safety is more important, and the impact on transportation, such as alternate transportation, such as walking and biking and whatnot, needs to have a higher priority in the state. And that, once again, this comes from the engineering side of my family, that research in advance before you build a project is important. So I guess I would just have a feeling, I guess what I'm asking in a roundabout way is, do you think that there needs to be cleaning house done at ODOT, or do you think that, or am I a little bit too pessimistic there?
Well, listen, what I'll say is, one of the things that I learned when I became treasurer is how important it is to set a really clear tone from the start. And when people ask me a slightly different question, I promise I'm getting back to your question, but this is an entry point into it. What are your first 100 days or 90 days or whatever as governor? My answer is, it's going to be a huge specific focus on making sure that the right team is in place. Part of that is asking for the resignation of directors that are currently in place. And then we'll have a conversation about whether they are on board with the vision that I have. That could be, it might well be a different vision that person has, and that's fine, and then they can leave. But we need to have someone in place in each of these key roles that's aligned with the vision I would have as governor. Same goes for the boards and commissions that the governor gets to appoint. It does not make sense to ignore that. I think that's a really underappreciated aspect of the governor's power to set a consistent agenda and head that direction. So I think you and I would probably have to have a more specific conversation for me to say to what degree each of these things need to be increased or decreased. But I'm not convinced that what's happening at ODOT now is perfectly in line with the vision I have, nor would we maybe ever get to 100%. But I think there's definitely room to get closer about a consistent agenda around safety, around mobility, around climate change in particular. So I think there's good conversation to have. Listen, I've probably got time for one or two more questions, but I can, that many of you are parents, I suspect, that silence that gets you a little nervous when there's a little too much silence. I'm starting to feel that. So maybe we could do one or two more, and then I better get upstairs and make sure people are on the right track.
And Mike, you have your hand up.
I want to put a little more color on Tobias to let everybody know that he's an avid biker.
That's true. In fact, I was talking with somebody the other day about someone was saying, make sure you tell them that you've been a cycling advocate for a long time, and you have the scars to prove it. And then we had a fun conversation about whether that person meant the evidence of my tangles with Betsy Johnson in policy land, or when I got hit by a car a couple of years ago while on my bike. So both are true.
Mike has his hand up, and then Gary, do you have your hand up, or is that from before?
I did, but I can pull it off.
Okay, Mike and Gary.
Sales tax, value added tax. Right now, a lot of our money comes from gasoline tax. We're going to be moving to electrification. I know our friend Jim Whitty having something to do with ODOT. So it has been testing the mileage.
Jim and I have been together on that for literally years, and I'm one of, I don't know how many hundreds who was an active participant.
A lot of
years ago.
years. It's been a lot of years, but the situation is coming upon us quickly. It's time to stop dicking around. So can you just give us a once over of on those things, value added tax, sales tax, and mileage tax? How are you gonna go with electric?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the reality with respect to vehicles is you have to move to some form of a tax that deals with how cars use the road, not based on how much gas they use. As you already pointed out, there's some cars that don't use any gas and they're still using the roads. And what is a gas tax really but a proxy for that impact that it has on the roads? It gives all kinds of other practicalities. This is something I spent a lot of time on when I was chair of the Transportation Committee in the House. As to other forms of revenue, I spent a lot of time on that in the Revenue Committee as well. I have a fairly simple way of looking at this too. You know, as the state's chief investment officer, I know very well the value of diversification on our investment side, and I think there's a parallel to the way that we take revenue in. Each single leg, or half leg in the case of property tax that we have, has some flaws, and you wouldn't want to put all of that on any one thing. So whether it's a sales tax or a value add tax or a carbon tax, there are ways to deal with consumption. You tax things for two reasons: one, to motivate behavior, or two, to raise money to buy things you want. And these can all be part of the conversation. We have to have a good conversation about that, but I am not afraid of having that conversation. I've proposed legislation in that regard, and I'm eager to be part of that conversation going forward.
Okay.
Gary, and then we'll let Tobias go.
Yeah, real quick question. Hopefully you can answer this one since you're the treasurer. Thoughts on forming a state bank of Oregon similar to what North Dakota has?
Well, happy to be part of that conversation. The role for Treasury there, I think, is making sure that if it were to happen, it would happen without unintended consequences. There is a constitutional question about that, but I think in general, the thing that attracts people to that is a desire to keep dollars circulating in the Oregon economy, and I'd certainly like those goals. If there's a conversation to be had about how we do more of that, count me in. I'm less concerned about whether it's called a state bank and more concerned about whether we're doing that right. There are elements that exist in Oregon already in terms of loan guarantees that happen at the Business Development Department. They don't happen to be called a state bank, but they have similar functions. So I think there's good discussion to be had about that, and perhaps ways that we could do more of that without taking on the capitalization questions or the liability that would be associated with something that's called a state bank. So I think the intent is good, and there's lots more discussion to be had about it.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Thank you all very much for the conversation. Jessica's going to put our contact info in the chat. I hope you will keep in touch, and maybe have me back again when the time is right.
Thank you. I'm hoping one day we can have people in person.
Me too. Me too. That would be great. Fantastic. Thanks for the time, everybody.
See you, Tobias.
You too, Charles. Thanks, everybody. Good night.